This is the 8th consecutive year that Millward Brown has published the predictions for the year ahead. And for those of you who may be seeing this for the first time, this content is designed to provide you with a clear guide on navigating the challenges and opportunities that we at Millward Brown anticipate over the next 12 months. A few logistical items before we get started. We're going to be leaving time for questions at the end, so please use the chat box in the GoToWebinar platform to submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation, and we will address those at the end. The session is being recorded, and we'll be circulating that via email after we wrap. And then lastly, you can download a full version of this predictions report available now at millwardbrown.com. So let's go ahead and dive into the content. This year, our predictions outline a wide range of topics. At the highest level, we're highlighting the need for marketers to optimize video and mobile advertising, evaluate opportunities with connected TV, and strive to develop inspiring branded content. The full report addresses 7 key topics through the perspectives of Millward Brown employees across the globe. And in this call, we're going to dive deep into 4 of these 7 predictions. Joining me on the call today, we have 4 of our senior digital and media leaders. We have Jolene McGoldrick, Georgi Georgiev, Corey Jeffrey, and Margaret Hung. And each of them are going to take us through one prediction and break it down into a few different sections. We're going to address the current landscape, Millward Brown's prediction for this year, and then lastly, we're going to go into implications and opportunities for measurement within that area of focus. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jolene McGoldrick, who's going to kick us off and talk about mobile. Jolene?
Great, Sarah. Thank you so much. My name is Jolene McGoldrick, and I am a VP of Insights at Millward Brown Digital. And I'm going to talk about this afternoon's first prediction that talks about how brands do mobile advertising. So my prediction is specifically that smart brands will really rethink how to create effective mobile ads. So a step back. So we know that good advertising is part art and part science. It's part about things like how your ads look, the technologies that you're using to enable them, the composition, but it's also part science, the technologies that you utilize, the capabilities in terms of the media that you use, etc. So the section that I will be working on specifically is really more about the art, how advertisers deploy the best technologies possible to really connect with their audiences, and then I'll segue to Georgi, who will really talk more on the science side of it, how to effectively use new media and capabilities to connect with brands better. So let's go to the next slide. So this is intuitive to all of us, but I want to put some context behind it, just how quickly the mobile ad spend has grown and will continue to grow over the next few years. So if you take a look at this chart, what you'll see for 2015 is that the global mobile ad spend was $48.7 billion. By 2016, that number more than doubles, and it's predicted to be $101.4 billion. And then that number almost doubles again by 2019. So that means really 2 things. It means that there's huge opportunity still in mobile advertising when we think about publishers and agencies to really develop the experience more, but it also means for brands that it's really incumbent on brands to really learn how to leverage and utilize mobile to take over a lot of the communication with audiences. And I'm going to show some examples of how we see really smart brands starting to do that, so that we can understand what the areas are for development and what those things we really need to get our heads around are. So let's go to the next slide. So the 3 examples that I want to give you, I think what these examples do is that they pretend where mobile advertising is really going. If we think a few years back, it's easy to think of mobile advertising as just some very small banner that's very difficult to read, that really was maybe an extension of digital or an extension of an offline campaign, and it was not very noticeable and it had very little impact. What we see very smart marketers doing is really staying on top of all of the major technologies that are happening and very quickly utilizing these technologies to tell part of the brand's story. And these 3 examples that I'm going to give are 3 very different examples of how we think brands did it very well this past year in 2015, and what this may hold for 2016 as technologies to leverage and ways to really build out mobile advertising capabilities. So the first capability I want to talk about is around video. So we know that video is a huge movement in digital advertising, especially when we look at younger audiences. More and more of their consumption on both mobile and desktop is more visual and more video based. So it's really incumbent on us as marketers to get our video experience and our visual experience for all audiences, but particularly younger audiences right. This first example utilizes micro video and hyperlapse technology to do that. So a few years ago, we put out a report on micro video and vines, and most people who saw that term didn't really know what it meant. It looked like a very quick video, and it wasn't clear what it was trying to do or who it was really for. So what we see with this Lowe's example is they take something that should really be in a much longer video, how to build a fire pit. There's no one who's ever been able to build a fire pit in 6 to 8 seconds. And they take this longer project, and by utilizing hyperlapse technology, they shorten it so that they can show this whole project unfolding over a series of vines. So again, two types of technology that they're employing, short micro videos and hyperlapse, to tell this longer story that's very compelling to audiences. This campaign did very, very well, both in terms of audience engagement, but also being recognized by the industry. So we think that's one of the trends, is really being able to use the best of video technology to be able to tell a longer story in a compressed amount of time. The second example is about social and social channels, and how to really utilize social channels to more interactively connect with audiences. And this example was something that Mercedes did via Instagram. Through Instagram, they were able to allow audiences to actually build their own car from really the wheels up and be able to post their entire car or creation on Instagram. So really changing the meaning of interactivity from something that has movement or motion to something that's being co-created between brand and audience. Particularly with younger audiences in the mobile social space, we should see a lot more co-creation. The third trend is really, I consider, a very tip of the spear trend, augmented and virtual reality. So we've seen this trend coming for a while now, more in the entertainment area, in travel, but it was always unclear, how do we really scale this? And what we see with innovations like Google Cardboard in particular is there's now this opportunity to deploy augmented or virtual reality to be able to simulate the experience. And so the best example we saw of this in this past year that gives marketers, I think, a path forward for how to be able to do this, particularly with automotive, was the Volvo XC90 campaign. So via Google Cardboard, they were able to give potential drivers the full experience of driving a Volvo XC90. So not just being able to look at the car, but also to be able to look at it from a 360 degree perspective around the car. What does the sunroof look like? What do the controls look like? What's the view from outside the window? So really taking the augmented reality technology all the way to its endpoint to be able to create essentially a virtual showroom. And I think we should expect to see a lot more of this. So these are three examples of really how advertisers are utilizing mobile in a deeper and more meaningful way to connect with audience. So I want to give some practical suggestions on how we can utilize this a little bit more as marketers. So let's go to the next slide, Sarah. So there's a massive opportunity, but to do that, there's certain guardrails we want to be able to put around things, or certain tips for really getting it right. And three of those that we think are, the first is staying on top of tech trends, and even tech trends that seem like they're so far out, like Internet of Things and augmented and virtual reality, and really giving some thought to how we can utilize those trends to connect with audiences more deeply. The second trend is about HDifying your digital presence. So we usually think of HD in terms of the image quality of what's on TV. But I think with both the expansion of these capabilities from a technical sense, but also platforms that are more visual, whether that's Instagram or Tumblr or Pinterest, audiences really are expecting to see a higher level of visual quality and visual composition. So really giving some thought to how is it that your product or your offer is being displayed visually. Is the quality of the image rich enough? Is the composition well done enough? Does it show a use case? And really just looking with a lot more of a visual lens at how the creative is depicted in the digital world. And then the third is really to endeavor to be as real-time as possible. So one of the trends we see, and we particularly see this around things like contests and promotions and even push notifications, is we have to work with the assumption that anything that will be communicated out will be received almost immediately and should be communicated back immediately. So if, for example, we're offering a promotion, there really can't be lag time in between when someone knows if they're a winner or not. It's better to do all of these things in real time because audiences' expectations have moved more towards that. Let's go to the next slide. So finally, what do we think this means for measurement? We think that really, when we think about what the role of measurement is in deploying better and smarter creative, it's really twofold. The first of those things is really thinking about optimizing mobile before a campaign goes live. So it's often the case that because mobile has historically been an afterthought of digital or an afterthought of the essence of the campaign, whether that's TV or magazine, that usually the creative is not available until right before the campaign is going to run. But we really see there's a difference between those that have been pre-tested and making sure that they're good enough to run, and when they're not, being able to make those tweaks necessary before they're going into market, rather than those that are just thrown up there. And particularly with mobile becoming an increased part of the spend, this is even more and more important to make sure that the best mobile creative are being flighted. And then the second is really being curious while a campaign is in market in terms of how well it's performing. How is it connecting with audiences? Is it breaking through? Is it capturing attention? And really keeping a very close eye to that so that we can know should we continue to run that creative, but also for future campaign executions or iterations, knowing the types of things that work with our target audience or not. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Georgi Georgiev, who will talk a little bit more about digital, more in terms of the technology. Georgi?
Thanks, Jolene. And for those of you on the line, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Georgi Georgiev, and I'm SVP of Media Analytics at Millward Brown. What I'm going to talk about today is header bidding and how it drives change in programmatic buying and just our thinking about programmatic. So with that, let's take a look on the next slide on a definition of header bidding, just so we get a sense of what that is. So header bidding is essentially an advanced technology about a way through which bidders as well as publishers can connect earlier in the process. And for programmatically enabled inventory, that means for publishers that they can collect multiple bids before making a decision which ad to display essentially on the page. Now, with that in mind, the obvious beneficiary of such technology is the publisher, because they get more complete picture of the demand. Therefore, they optimize their spending, or actually their yield, I should say, and they maximize their revenue. So there's obvious reasons for which they would engage in this process. What I actually want to talk about, though, today is how that affects the advertisers and the media buyers, and one particular implication of that is viewability. So we know that in the last few years there's been a tremendous push for delivering more viewable impressions, in fact only to be paying potentially for viewable impressions. So through understanding the mechanics of header bidding, we want to build and understand that connection to programmatic. So with that in mind, let's dive into the next slide on what has been there prior to header bidding. So without header bidding, you have a typical publisher daisy chain where there's some portion of inventory being sold directly, and the unsold portion in sequential steps has been offered to different partners, whether it's exchanges or buy-side partners, where on each step you basically decrease the price, hoping to sell it, and of course there's some time limit as to how many hops you can make. So that has been the status quo for a while. How is that changed by the header bidding process? Well, let's take a look at what a header bidding flow looks like. Typical web page has header, footer, and a body with the actual ad in between. The header portion, hence the name header bidding, is where there is places to integrate various partners and collect bidding information through them. So if you think of it, the page renders, ad calls, or actually this announcements for this ad placements being available are made, bids are collected, and all of that is passed back to the publisher in near real time, right? At that point, the publisher can compare all of the collected demand versus their maybe direct arrangement, private place, marketplace arrangements, etc., and make an optimal decision what to do with this particular impression and who to win the impression. So the key piece here, though, is to note that that process is kicked off by the header. At that point, the page hasn't exactly quite loaded yet, and so a lot of the bidding is happening, in fact, in isolation of any information about whether this particular ad will be even visible to the user, or would it be actually viewed. So with that in mind, there's a second dynamic that was worth noting for us here. Header bidding also being implemented in the header means that for many publishers, they would be exposing a whole lot more inventory through this process than traditionally through the waterfall. Why? Well, because in the waterfall approach, you basically carve out the portion that you have sold directly, and here you're not making that decision at the header level. You're offering everything through a header, so everything could be potentially bid on. So what do we conclude out of that? Well, two things, right? You have more inventory flowing through this approach, and you have also lack of knowledge about the viewability status that this particular impression will have once the page is completely loaded. So let's move to the next step, in which I'm going to provide a few suggestions as how you may want to think of tackling that apparent dilemma. As anything, you should be aware of the viewability your campaigns are hitting and delivering, and you should track that and obviously try to improve on it over time. Now, the change that header bidding also brings to us is that now we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot more inventory flowing and potentially be available to us, and so it is probably a really good idea to start to build some perhaps publisher level view or understanding of such metrics as viewability, for instance. The last piece is you should factor viewability into your pricing and allocation process, and it's interesting to see how the dynamics of the marketplace would evolve and include more and more metrics and trackability to an understanding of viewability in particularly the programmatic space, because we, I think, long moved from the days of remnant inventory. If anything, header bidding is bringing huge volumes of potentially premium inventory into this process. So more reasons to keep track on the viewability front. And to make the connection to how this affects measurement, on the next slide, we kind of look at this at two product perspectives. You should get a good ability to track your audience and your campaign delivery, and we have a way to do that through our audience product suite, in which you can monitor viewability and look at the publisher level, etc. So that would answer questions such as are my ads being viewed, to what level, by which publisher is delivering a better viewability to the audience I want to pursue, etc. And we have something new that we call pre-campaign testing process, in which you can engage with us and run basically a mini campaign against specific audiences and publisher sets, and get a sense of what that viewability could look like for you. So these are two practical implications, but to circle back, I think that basically the core of the prediction is through the header bidding, which would drive more volume and different type of volume through the programmatic buying process. You have even further increased the pressure on understanding and delivery viewability metrics around those particular media buys. So that's kind of the conclusion of this section. And with that, I want to pass the next slide to Corey Jeffrey, who will talk about connected TV.
Great, thanks, Georgi. So my name is Corey Jeffrey. I'm a member of our product management and development group here at Millward Brown Digital. And like all the other presenters, I really appreciate your time joining us this afternoon. So the complexities around header bidding, viewability, and programmatic buying on digital platforms that Georgi just described are surely a look into the future of the continued evolution of the connected TV landscape over the coming years. Connected TV, or smart TV, or over-the-top, OTT for short, is now a mainstream television viewing experience that is bringing profound change to the way people consume premium video content and advertising. As anyone who's binge-watched an entire season or series on their connected TV can attest, I personally can't get enough of House of Cards on Netflix, Better Call Saul, the second season at least, on Amazon, and Casual on Hulu, from any one of 3 connected or smart TVs in our home. Penetration is now achieving nearly 60% of all internet-enabled households, and connected TV opens the door for more on-demand content, better ad targeting, and new and more engaging ad formats. But for now, the most watched OTT content is streaming largely on ad-free, subscription-based platforms. Some platforms will continue to rely solely on revenue from downloads and subscriptions, while others will experiment with models that offer a balance of advertising and subscription dollars. In fact, I came across an article from Wired just last week talking about how Amazon was making some of its new original programming available to non-Prime members for, through an ad-supported model. So as viewing behaviors continue to shift and more quality ad revenue comes available, advertising dollars will surely follow. Will this mean an inevitable decline in quality of advertising subsidized content on linear or live TV and a subsequent loss in viewers, or will linear content providers adapt and make their content available on these platforms and recapture those audiences and ad revenue? I think the jury is still out, but it's worth noting that connected TV CPMs are currently about 1.5 to 2 times higher than those for traditional network ad inventory. So the imperative is pretty clear. For now, let's take a look at the connected TV landscape from the audience perspective. Go to the next slide. So according to a recent Millward Brown ad reaction study, viewers are now actually consuming more on-demand TV than ever before, chalking up 66 minutes per day, edging higher than live linear TV viewing for the first time. That's newsworthy in and of itself, but it's worth noting that not all of that on-demand viewing is strictly over the top. It also includes video on demand and time-shifted viewing of otherwise linear content. But clearly, these new viewing behaviors are taking hold. For example, by some recent estimates, Netflix streaming traffic is now accounting for about 40% of all internet traffic in the U.S. So, as connected TV penetration and usage achieve critical mass and more quality inventory comes online, these OTT platforms will undoubtedly begin to siphon real money away from traditional TV ad platforms. So let's look at the emerging opportunities in the connected and advanced TV advertising landscape from the media buyer's perspective. On this slide, you see that according to the IAB, the current average media budget allocation for advanced TV is $1.4 million. About 70% of ad buyers expect to spend more on advanced and connected TV advertising in the next 12 months, while about 31% plan to decrease their broadcast TV and 17% plan to decrease their cable TV spend. 68% of those said that they expect to shift funds away from TV budgets to fund advanced TV, and 54% will pull from expanded or experimental ad budgets. Of those advanced TV budget increases, advertisers said that they expect to increase their spending on programmatic and addressable TV, as well as over-the-top and interactive TV, which includes second screen experiences. So in short, the ad buyers are definitely looking to increase spend in advanced and connected TV platforms, and in OTT in particular, but the current lack of quality inventory and audience fragmentation across the various distribution channels and apps, the Netflix, the Hulus, the Amazon, Apple TVs, will limit significant investment opportunities for big brands, at least for 2016. However, with macro factors like the current presidential election cycle highlighting the power of addressably targeted TV advertising, and more high-quality content coming to OTT platforms all the time, and along with it, bringing attractive and sizable audiences, this year is likely to prove a watershed in the evolution of TV advertising models, strategies, and tactics. So for 2016, despite consumer uptake and buyer intent to invest more heavily in advanced and connected TV platforms, we predict significant barriers will make these scenarios less likely, at least over the remainder of this year. Until recently, traditional TV advertising hasn't really had to compete directly with digital platforms for ad dollars. And as such, with the early days of digital display and video, there are still plenty of issues around lack of measurement and the limited inventory available from platform providers. Even though connected TV provides more choice, viewers will still gravitate to their favorite content curators, which will certainly continue to include linear TV for the foreseeable future. As such, again, we don't see connected TV posing a threat to traditional advertising models today or this year, but 2016 will be a turning point for connected TV viewing that will represent real implications for the future of TV advertising. So for brands that are already advertising or considering advertising on these platforms, we've got a few tips for getting it right. First, connected TV, like all other digital delivery platforms, holds out the promise of getting closer to the holy grail of one-to-one, customized, targeted advertising and content delivery. The power of data available for targeting and customization on these platforms is incredibly seductive, but be careful not to invest too heavily in custom creative format and technical format development for every possible segment and platform, focused typically on lower funnel conversion and behavioral metrics at the expense of leveraging the scale of both traditional TV and other traditional platforms and these newer digital platforms to reinforce a consistent brand identity across your entire brand audience. Next, you'll need to balance creative and ad tech development investments with the size of the opportunity for your brand on these platforms. You may not want to spend to create 100 different targeted creative executions, nor should you simply repurpose your linear TV spots for distribution on these platforms. The most effective, over-the-top, online video and mobile video creative executions we've measured are those that consider and reflect the viewer's media consumption and device usage context to achieve the stopping power that really enables their brand message to stand out from the clutter. Finally, as with all digital advertising platforms in this era of connected data and connected devices, be careful not to focus too myopically on the observable behavioral metrics and lower funnel conversion tactics as the sole basis for evaluation and optimization. Good brand stewards are always mindful of the larger brand building implications of these strategies and tactics as they relate to the long-term health of their brands. That brings us to my last slide to tie off on the implications for measurement in a connected TV context. So historically, lower penetration and usage levels around connected TV, as well as siloed visibility of campaign delivery by the various OTT publishers and platforms, has posed a challenge to the media research community in terms of getting good, comprehensive upper and lower funnel measurements of the effectiveness of these platforms and campaigns. Now, with penetration and usage at scale, by leveraging cutting-edge cross-publisher ad tracking technologies, we're able to measure both the branding and downstream behavioral impact of video advertising across all forms of TV and premium long-form video content delivery, from linear and broadcast TV to over-the-top and online and mobile video, even addressable TV inventory served through leading MVPD platform operators. This will help ensure marketers can strike the right balance to invest and optimize for both short-term activation and conversion, as well as long-term brand building across the full breadth of TV and video ad channels in their mix. And so with that, and to discuss the implications of the broader consumer journey from awareness to conversion beyond any singular media channel like TV, connected TV, mobile, or in-store, I'd like to say thanks and go ahead and turn things over to my colleague, Michelle Hung. Michelle?
Hi, thanks, Corey. Everyone, I'm Margaret Hung, the SVP of Solutions at Millward Brown Digital, and I'm here to talk about our last prediction, which is about how digital is influencing the way advertisers plan and execute holistic marketing programs tailored to the consumer journey. Now, consumer journey marketing has been a hot topic in recent years, but it's been very hard to put into practice. Marketers have a lack of visibility into which touchpoints are most relevant and how those touchpoints work together at different stages of the consumer journey to influence brand choice. Another issue is that teams that are needed to work together to coordinate efforts across touchpoints traditionally work in silos. Organizational change is often needed to foster better collaboration. But despite these challenges, we are predicting that in 2016, consumer journey-centric marketing will make substantial inroads into uniting sales and media planning efforts, simply because marketers who don't integrate those efforts will be left behind. Next slide, please. We live in an increasingly digitally enabled world. Consumers are researching and shopping on whatever device at whatever channel is most convenient for them at any point in time. In the PC-dominant world, internet access enabled e-commerce and web rooming, where consumers research products online before making the purchase in-store. We could still get away with viewing online and offline as different channels. But with the portability of mobile, over 70% of consumers in the US use their smartphones in-store to look up product reviews, compare prices, search for coupons, and perhaps even see a geo-targeted ad or get an app notification in the process. What this means for marketers is that it is more important than ever before that digital content, couponing, advertising messages are all timed and coordinated with the shopper experience to drive both online and in-store purchases at that right moment. We see that retailers are also aggressively trying to bridge that cross-channel divide, using their strengths in one channel to gain advantages in others. From our clients, we hear about how brick-and-mortar retailers are using their in-store negotiating power to dictate online media spend for their .com sites. As retailers increasingly coordinate efforts to secure revenue across channels, marketers also need to better coordinate their shopper and media planning efforts to ensure that those media dollars are being used efficiently. We're also seeing that digital advertising and sales experiences are converging. You might have heard that Mondelez is introducing shoppable ads in 25 countries, where they're integrating click-to-buy buttons into their display advertising. And you can see an example of that here on the slide on the right-hand side. Pinterest introduced shoppable pins last year, and Google also announced that it will be rolling out their version of buy buttons within mobile search ads. Next slide. So we see that in a digitally enabled world, digitally enabled maps of the consumer journey help marketers understand where to invest and how to coordinate efforts across online and offline touchpoints to influence brand consideration, purchase, and loyalty. Digital technology allows us to collect data that makes it easier to quantify the efficacy of different touchpoints. However, for the marketer, there are a lot of choices to make across touchpoints, across the physical and digital environments, across media and sales channels, and also across different devices. So the consumer journey mapping process can often be overwhelming. Our tips for getting it right start with simplicity. Right? So our first tip is about starting small and starting smart. Unless you have a huge budget to spend and time to kill, it's worth knocking out a few touch points as options from the start. Right? There are syndicated tools out there in the marketplace like compete.com that can help you understand which touch points have higher reach and maybe lower reach. And you really want to knock out those very low reach touch points or sites, and not worry about them in your consumer mapping process. You could also design a short survey to just get some initial views on which touch points are relevant, or take a critical look at third-party research reports. There are many different ways to help eliminate touch points that get a lot of hype but are not relevant to your consumer shopper journey from the very beginning. Oftentimes, just simply understanding the reach figures are enough to tell you if an investment is worth considering. Once you've narrowed down your list of potential touch points to examine, be prepared to challenge your hypotheses and test and learn. The consumer journey mapping process is a journey in itself. We had a consumer electronics client who believed the fastest path to sales growth was to improve sales conversion among existing considerers. So we looked at the journeys of those brand considerers, and we quickly discovered that the client brand already had a high rate of conversion among them, and there wasn't much room for growth. The best opportunity for this client for short-term growth was to increase brand consideration among non-considerers as they were starting their shopping and research process. We found in our path to purchase work that there are 2 to 3 touch points that the majority of consumers within this product category went to at the beginning of the journey. The brands that they were exposed to on those touch points were the ones that were most likely to be included in the consideration set as the consumers moved through their journey, and then those were also the brands that the consumers were most likely to buy at the very end of the journey. Our client's problem was that their effort in trying to close the sale on people who had been exposed to the brand in the mid stages of the consumer journey and were already considering them meant that they weren't putting their efforts or directing their efforts to those 2 to 3 touch points that were most influencing the final purchase decision, right? So through this process of working through the consumer journey mapping process, we were able to lead or initiate efforts to explore more into the consumer journey and learn how to optimize the brand's presence at the start of the journey for short-term sales, and then how to strengthen brand equity for the long term. Over the years, we've been happy to see a greater number of cross-functional team members from the client organization join us in the consumer journey mapping process and to strategize based on those results. However, I'm sure many of you can relate to the day-to-day executional challenge when teams from different functional backgrounds try to communicate with a common vernacular. You've got the e-commerce teams speaking in traffic referrals and conversion rates, right? You've got the shopper teams talking about slotting fees and end caps, brand teams speaking brand speak, digital teams speaking about CPAs, programmatic, and now header bidding. And we've got the traditional media teams speaking in terms of GRPs. Everyone's on a tight timeline, and not everyone can quickly learn how to speak a common language. It's often helpful to identify connectors who are adept at bridging the communication gap between the different teams to facilitate dialogue so that collaboration can happen more quickly and successfully. Finally, on the last slide, we have 2 more tips related specifically to measuring the consumer journey. The best approach to measuring consumer journeys is to combine data from multiple data sources. And this is because there is not one data source that will give you a holistic view of all the relevant touch points and tell you how and why consumers are using them. In particular, we like to combine surveys and qualitative interviews with digital clickstream, ad exposure, sales data, or other passive data sources. Passive data is a powerful complement to traditional research approaches as they reflect what people actually do at a specific time, not simply what they recall. The ability to connect the dots between different touch points in the consumer journey allows a marketer to begin addressing that problem of last touch attribution, where sales are attributed to the last touch point immediately preceding the sale. As marketers, we know that sales is driven by a combination of factors that influence consumers over time. So what we're really looking for is for connected data sets and multi-touch attribution models by which we can more accurately answer those questions of which touch points in what sequence are most important at each stage of the consumer journey to influence the brand objectives. This brings us to the conclusion of our digital predictions today. I'll turn the session back over to Sarah for wrap-up.
Thanks so much, Margaret. So as each of our presenters mentioned, the key to getting each of these areas right often does come down to measurement. And that's really why we at Millward Brown have spent time digging into these predictions. These are the questions that our clients are bringing to us every day. So I wanted to mention that we do have a full suite of solutions designed to help you answer questions within each of these areas of focus. If you're interested in learning more or have a specific question related to measurement around this content, please do reach out to your Millward Brown representative, or you can email us at digitalsolutions@millwardbrown.com. And before I turn it over to questions, just a reminder that you can find the full report online at millwardbrown.com/digitalpredictions. So now we're going to open it up for questions. You can use the chat box in the platform on the right-hand side of your screen to submit questions, We'll also address as many as we can, and we have time for today. If we don't get a chance to get to your question, we'll follow up with you directly after the event. So we've gotten some questions throughout the presentation. I'm just going to go ahead and tee these up. So here's one from the brand side, or from a brand perspective, how can we handle all of the new types of formats coming out by publishers that aren't maybe as established as digital or video? Does anyone, Jolene, maybe you want to take that one?
Yeah, Sarah, I'm happy to start with this one. So I think the way to tackle that is really from both sides. I think the most imperative part is really on the part of the publisher part, that we see a lot of pushback from brands on new formats being proposed that publishers can't explain either the efficacy behind them or the mechanics behind them, right? So how do we know they work? What's the data to show that they work? And why is it that these formats would work better than something else? So I think this change is best addressed from a publisher perspective or even an agency perspective, right? Of coming to brand clients with already that research that shows that the particular ad unit is effective. And then I think from a marketer perspective, marketers have pretty clear frameworks in terms of the what constitutes an effective ad. So making sure that there's a way to test ads within those new emerging formats within that framework, I think is essential. But I really do think that the sea change starts to happen publishers rather than just approaching brands and agencies with these formats, that the approach is rooted in research ultimately.
Thanks, Jolene.
I think thanks.
So we have some good questions coming in. Here's one about, this looks like coming to you, Margaret. So you spoke about connecting different data sets, particularly passive data sets. What are the types of ways to connect passive data sets in the financial industry?
The financial, that's a really good question. So a lot of financial research, and it does differ depending on what product that you're talking about, but generally a lot of that behavior, consumer behavior, is having both, well, it's happening online, and it's also happening offline. So in terms of the passive data, where we're actually tracking what people are actually doing, oftentimes those data sets are more available in terms of what people are doing in the online space. And there's consumer panels such as the one that we have at Millward Brown that can help you track exactly what people are doing and the path to purchase before signing up for a credit card, for example. But on the other hand, there are also databases out there that have information about people's credit card information. You can match that with other passive data sources that you might have within your own CRM database. These are all CRM databases, consumer panels, sales databases that are out there from a third-party partner. Those are all ways that you can kind of try to collect and build that overall holistic picture of the consumers and their journeys.
Great, thanks, Margaret. We have one about the best way. What is the best way to measure online impact or a possible increase in sales? Julian, do you think you want to take that one?
Sure. I'm happy to take that one. So I would say that there's really two ways to think about this. There is sort of the more traditional way, which would be some type of sales ROI, right? Depending upon the product, what you're looking at is essentially among people exposed to the campaign, how did their purchases change? Did they start purchasing more? Did the frequency increase? Did the volume increase, etc.? Depending upon the vertical, all of these types of purchase behaviors are usually tracked. For automotive data, there's POC. For shopper data, there's ShopCom, right? So what that usually means is you're connecting exposure data with some third-party data set. The other thing we're seeing as a potential to be able to do that, but the challenge with that is always that exposure and purchase are not contemporaneous. So I might see a great ad for a detergent, but I might have enough detergent and might not need detergent for another 2 or 3 weeks, right? So there's an inherent lag time in that because of that, which is often frustrating to marketers because we really are working with the expectation of more real-time data, but we can't change the behavior. So what we're starting to see a movement towards is understanding, whether certain brand attributes or brand KPIs, things like brand favorability, etc., can actually be a proxy for sales. Right? So what are those particular KPIs that will indicate purchase down the line, right? And looking at those instead. So if for my detergent brand, I know that to get sales up, I have to increase trust and I have to increase top-of-mind awareness. Testing that, understanding what those relationships are, so that when I'm tracking my campaign in market, I have a sense of, wow, my 2 sales indicators are moving. So this is going to give me a sign of which are those creative, or which are those sites, or which are those audience groupings that will be most effective for sales. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything else to that. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Jolene. So we got a question about, are there any significant demographic differences between audiences viewing the same content or video content in a linear versus connected TV viewing context? I think that goes back to your connected TV section, Corey.
Sure. Yeah, happy to address that. We are seeing what I think you would expect to see, which is that through our measurements, which again are consistent with what we're seeing from a third-party research perspective as well, is that as of right now, there is still a skew towards a somewhat younger demographic in terms of the profile of the audience consuming content through connected TV and smart TV platforms. However, we don't see any sort of meaningful skew in terms of the gender split, and I think a lot of that has to do with sort of the nature of the technology and the experience being more, again, familiar and consistent with traditional TV viewing and content consumption, as well as development of programming that appeals to a broad base audience from both a gender and an age standpoint. Historically, as new principally digital ad platforms have emerged, we've typically seen the same thing, a skew towards a younger, more technologically savvy, sometimes slightly male skewing audience profile. We are again seeing some of that with respect to age difference, but my personal prediction is that we'll see those differences to a sort of typical linear TV audience all the way very, very quickly, especially again as the technology becomes more seamless. So we're starting to see really good navigation and search platforms in smart TVs where the smart capability is embedded at the OEM level. So you're not having to switch inputs and swap remotes. It's all done from your main TV remote. Reducing that friction, just making the content more easily accessible by folks across the spectrum of sort of technical comfort and capability, I think are really going to be the key to bridging that gap, that little bit of a gap in terms of the again principally age demographic profile of a quote unquote typical linear TV audience or a connected TV audience, viewing in some cases much the same content just on a different platform.
Great, thanks, Corey. So there's still time to submit questions. We have quite a few. We have time for a couple more. So here's one about viewability. So is the programmatic environment by design conducive or adverse to viewability? Jorge, I think that falls into your area.
Thanks, Sarah.
Sure.
Yeah, so happy to address that question. I would say that if anything, programmatic in general, it's probably more poised to be conducive as opposed to adverse to viewability, even though today we may not have exactly this type of experience. So I would just want to draw a parallel. If you think of what was the world before programmatic, you would have somebody just call an ad rep or fax an IO saying, I want to insert that many impressions, etc. That world didn't have any better means to deliver viewability. So certainly it was kind of devoid of any technology allowing to do that. If you kind of fast forward to our world today, where there's more heightened sense about, is my impression served below the fold, is it going to be viewable? So what has been the best practice? I think kind of leaders in that space, such as Google, Facebook, etc., that have bold statements about clients paying only for viewable impressions. I believe that's actually is executed on a post-impression basis. By that I mean, when they deliver impression data, I'm not sure necessarily it's going to be viewable or not, but at the end of the day, the client account is only billed against actual viewable impressions that were delivered. Now, jumping back to programmatic, I don't think that there's anything preventing to have that type of arrangement in a programmatic sense. Historically, maybe it's true that there was some sort of stigma that some of the inventory that made available in exchanges were kind of remnant or below the fold. That's certainly not the case today. There's ways to get very premium inventory. If anything, header bidding is pushing a lot more inventory into that pipe. So my personal sense and prediction is that the first level arrangement that could happen is have premium inventory enabled privately or otherwise be in the same kind of vein of arrangement that be paid only for actually reported viewable impressions. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Then the next thing is you get some sort of additional guarantee or pricing modification for just generically programmatic inventory.
Okay, great, Jorge, thank you. So we have a question about ad blocking and what it's bringing to mobile advertising. Jillian, I'll punt that one over to you.
Sure. So I'd say there's really two things that we should think about when we're thinking about ad blocking, right? There's the ad blocking itself, right, and what that's doing, and then I think there's this overall concept sort of ad blocking, or really, I think the better way to say it maybe is even ad avoidance, that perhaps is actually the bigger challenge that we have to address. So in terms of ad blocking, we see, and mobile and desktop varies a little bit. We see somewhere around 20% of people stating that they use ad blockers. It's a little bit higher on desktop than mobile because I think there's a little bit more sophistication needed on mobile, often to proactively block ads. So what does that mean in terms of digital advertising and in terms of mobile advertising? The clearest thing that we know that it means is more of a movement towards more native types of content. And that word native is very broad, right? Native content can mean something like an article that is a sponsored article, right? That's talking about, there's some great examples on for a list of this, right? Rather than have just a bunch of display ads or mobile display ads for TGI Fridays, you could do articles around it, right? So that feels like content, but it's really still advertising, right? Native articles, some people also consider to be certain bespoke Facebook formats to be native advertising, right? But that definitely means is more, or Pinterest sponsored pins to be native advertising. So I think we're going to continue to see more native advertising, and that really ties into the issue. So why is it that? Because I think the bigger trend is really ad avoidance, right? Ad blocking is one way to avoid ads. Another way to avoid ads is just to scroll past them, to skip past them, to not look at them at all, right? And it's this idea that with so many sources, I think Corey talked about this a little bit before, so many sources of content coming in and so many choices of content coming in, it's very easy to skip ads. So what we think this really means is really a necessity for the industry to sort of center around this idea that attention is very precious, right? And so when we're thinking about advertising, what we're ultimately thinking about is what are those 1 or 2 or 3 seconds, what is it that we need to deliver to be able to capture that attention. And I think what that will mean in terms of content and in terms of creation of advertising, this idea of moving more towards user centricity, so that the ad is about the person looking at the ad rather than the ad is about the brand itself. So the ad is not, this is my detergent and this is how it works. It's more, this is how you do laundry and this is how my detergent helps you do laundry more quickly, more efficiently, better, etc. So that switch is really, I think, how the industry as a whole will grapple with ad avoidance, but I'd say ad blocking is really just the tip of the iceberg on that.
Jolene, thanks so much. So we're getting close to the end of our hour here, and I just wanted to thank everyone for submitting those questions. There were some really good questions there. We had a couple more specific ones that we'll follow up with after the fact. But just a reminder, we are going to be sending a recording out of this session via email. You'll receive that in the next 24 to 48 hours. And if you have any questions that come to you after this session that you didn't get a chance to ask us live here, please feel free to email us at digitalsolutions@millwardbrown.com, and we'll make sure we get an answer back to you on that particular question. So with that, I just wanted to thank the presenters. I wanted to thank all of you for joining and wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.